Chattanooga, everyone. As you can see here, we have reached the end of the line. Quite literally. So we're going to pull the locomotive onto the turntable and spin it around 180 degrees for the return trip to Grand Junction. This turntable you're looking at here was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge and Iron Company and was used by the Central Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia at their locomotive back shops. That is up until 1925 when they sold it to a branch line based out of Cedartown, Georgia. In Cedartown, it was used in a very similar fashion to how we're using it today. We acquired this table in the 80s, moved to this location, and we've been using it here ever since. This table is 80 feet long, and it weighs in at 80 tons. Keep in mind the average school bus only weighs about 6 or 7 tons. But that locomotive right there, it weighs in at 125 tons. So when it's on the table here, the overall weight between the two will be sitting just over 200 tons. So it may surprise you to know that this table was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending off each end, and it would have taken 4 people to push those poles to extend the table around. Do we have any volunteers? We're going to need 4. We got 1 back there. We got 2 and 3, and I'm just kidding. No, we don't do it that way anymore. Now instead, we just use a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator shed here that our conductor Andrew will be operating. Now the way we're able to turn it by hand, and the way we're still able to turn it by motors here today is by making sure the table is balanced. As the locomotive gets centered on the table here, keep an eye. If you keep an eye on the far end of the table down here where I'll be at, you'll see it drop by just a few inches. When it drops, we know the table is balanced. So basically, when it drops, he stops. Now, the locomotive pulling our train today is the 606. It was built in 1954 by General Motors Electromotive Division, or EMD, for the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad, more famously known as the Milwaukee Road. It is a model SW1200, the SW meaning switching. This locomotive was designed for moving cars around in the yard, and the 1200 means that 12-cylinder engine produces 1200 horsepower. We acquired this locomotive in 2015 from the United States Navy, who owned it at the time, brought it here to Chattanooga, and will restore it back to operation. We've been using it here ever since. We do have about 10 or so operational diesel locomotives that we do use in rotation to pull our passenger trains. Of those 10, I would like to point out that the 606 here is actually the smallest and least powerful locomotive we have in our collection. The most powerful diesel locomotive we have in our collection is the Southern Railway 3170. It's on display at Grand Junction Station, produced in the late 70s. And that locomotive, compared to this one, producing 1,200 horsepower, that one produces over 3,000 horsepower. Now, if you have a look up in the cab up there, you're going to see our engineer, Jody. He's responsible for operating this locomotive and getting us here and back safely today. So everyone go ahead and give him a wave. While these here are commonly referred to as a diesel locomotive, the correct term for these engines is actually diesel electric, meaning inside the engine there's a large diesel motor turning a generator. That generator produces electricity, and that electricity is fed down to the traction motor that's set on each axle of the locomotive. And it's those traction motors that are actually propelling the engine, hence the term diesel electric. You can think of it as a hybrid of sorts. Diesel locomotives have always been made that way, and that is the way they're still made today. Whether it's Norfolk Southern, CSX, or Union Pacific, they're all diesel electric. The major difference between the locomotives built in 1954 and the ones being made today is that today's modern engines have computer systems in them, as well as produce much more power and are much more fuel efficient. The reason why these locomotives were going to replace the steam locomotive was for money. The steam locomotives were much more expensive all around to operate. There is a misconception, though, that power was the reason. That is actually not the case. Most steam locomotives of the day were much more powerful than their diesel locomotive counterparts. For example, as I mentioned a few moments ago, this locomotive in front of us, built in 1954, only produces 1,200 horsepower. But one of our operating steam locomotives, the Southern Railway 4501, built in 1911, it produces 53,900 pounds of tractive effort, the equivalent of about 2,500 horsepower. It was not until about the mid-70s that diesel locomotives would finally be able to reach that 2,500 horsepower rating, about 65 years later.
I didn't even know that myself.
A lot of you have probably seen our equipment before in the past. We are very often involved in music videos and film production. For example, in the past we've worked with both. We've worked with both Johnny Cash and Josh Turner on music videos filmed involving our equipment. And we work on films such as October Sky with Jake Gyllenhaal and Laura Dern, Leatherhead with George Clooney, Water for Elephants with Robert Pattinson and Reese Witherspoon, and most recently 42 with Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford. The last 3 of those movies I mentioned also being partially filmed on our property here. And we're also frequently involved in documentaries and children's shows filming episodes as well. As you probably noticed here, while our train still sits on track 1, we've lined the locomotive up to track 2. That is so we can do a runaround. What that means is the locomotive is going to go past our train and then through a switch. It will then reverse through that switch back into track 1, took up to the opposite end of the train. So what was the front is now the back and vice versa. Now that we've completed turning the locomotive around, if anyone does have any questions, I'll be standing right over here at the rear of our train. You can come see me there. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. You're also welcome to follow that locomotive to the opposite end of our train just beyond the depot if you would like to watch it recoupled to the train for the return trip. Feel free to return to the train at any time, but please make sure you do return to the same car and seat you rode in on the way over. Don't forget there is a restroom available in that depot there right next to the train route where they were at East Chattanooga. And as I said, if you have some questions, come see me. Otherwise, I will see you back on the train.
Still recording?
Yep.
Go up, see it hook up.
I'm gonna follow it. I won't. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Trying to get the. Excuse me. Excuse me. Are we allowed to go down there and see it couple up?
And then by that light, got a big hook.
The world's strongest handshake.
Yeah, sure. Look at him. So he went south, he's gonna switch the track, so he comes back on this one. He's gonna switch it.
You just flipped the switch.
I thought Chance could go back.
Yeah,
He can, but he's gotta switch the track.
the track
So
down
that when
there.
he backs up, he's on this rail line, not that.
The track down there that switches off to that way, that's for the 6-hour ride and the 9-hour ride.
I thought he could go back on the
No, because if he had just backed up again, he would have been back on that other one.
Yeah, there's a certain alignment that they have to switch to actually get the tracks to align to the second track. It's kind of like when they pull the lever, it moves a thing that slides a piece of track over to the other side. my God car's in the front now. Well, no, it's actually the back.
Like it.
Come on, hook up the air brakes, my dude. He's hooking up the air brakes. Takes that. Does that. There we go. Sorry, I forgot about the recording. Sorry about whenever I upload this to YouTube. Oh my God, I just ran. I never noticed that there's a little light bulb down there.